Welcome to One Happy Lawyer, the estate planning podcast.
Welcome to One Happy Lawyer, the estate planning podcast with Attorney Dan Krause, founder of Krause Estate Planning and Elder Law Center in Wisconsin. Dan has been practicing estate planning and elder law since 1999 and is a board-certified estate planning law specialist. I'm Lisa Mosbey, your host, and today we're talking about how the cost of nursing care can affect a family's home and other assets, and what thoughtful planning can and cannot address here in Wisconsin. Thanks for joining me again today, Dan.
It's great to have another chance to talk with you, Lisa. I really enjoyed our last chat, and I'm looking forward to today.
Me too. You know, Dan, when people hear that nursing home care can cost thousands of dollars a month, what are they usually most afraid of losing?
Well, what they say they're most afraid of losing is their home, or sometimes their savings or IRAs, etc. Their security is really what they're talking about. So it's not necessarily the physical things, although many people are very, very attached to their home, or farmers are attached to their land, or business owners are attached to their business. But in the bottom, in the final consideration for them is really losing their ability to control their own destiny, to make decisions about where they want to be or what they want to do. And without money, if they've spent everything, they lose their choices, they lose their freedoms, and they really lose a lot of what they consider to be themselves. So I think most people will say that they're afraid of losing money or losing assets, but what they really seem to be afraid of is losing their ability to be an agent in the world and to control their own destiny.
I can see how that would be difficult to put words to when you're in the midst of it. And for a Wisconsin family that has done no planning, what can happen to the home and the savings when long-term health care becomes necessary?
If this happens, this story happens over and over and over, hundreds of times a year in Wisconsin, thousands of times a year across the United States, is people end up needing long-term care, and that care costs a lot. And in fact, the evidence that so many people lose everything to care is that Medicaid, the Medicaid program, pays for about half of all long-term care costs or nursing home costs in the United States, which means that at least half of the people that are in nursing homes or long-term care qualify for Medicaid, which means they have very little or maybe nothing at all. So if you can imagine having to pay $15,000 a month for an indeterminate amount of time, how long could the normal person, your average middle class, working class person, afford that? Well, if they've been very good savers, they may be able to afford it for a couple of years, or maybe 3 or 4 years, but most people can only afford it for a year or two before they're really out of resources. And then now it's time to sell the home, to sell other assets, and unfortunately that's what happens.
And a lot of people think Medicare or regular health insurance will handle long-term nursing care. Where do people get surprised?
Most people don't think about long-term care until maybe they're in their 50s, more likely their 60s or 70s. And most people don't think about Medicare either until they're around that age, because it's just not an issue for them. So unless they have family members, parents perhaps, maybe even aunts and uncles or grandparents that they were familiar with their finances, they don't really understand the financial burden that going into a long-term care facility can be. So it just surprises them when they find out sometimes, and unfortunately, it's too late for them to get an affordable policy of long-term care insurance, which is something that people should really look into when they're in their 40s, maybe even 30s, because at that point, it's usually quite affordable, and if they can hold on to that policy, it should not grow into an unaffordable premium like it would if somebody just starts looking for it after maybe a health diagnosis, or maybe they're already in their 70s or even mid to late 60s. It might be prohibitively expensive. So the people get caught in this perception kind of a trap between the time when they're really thinking about this problem that might happen and the time that they can afford to deal with it. And it's like between a rock and a hard place.
If somebody's in the midst of a health crisis, mom or dad are dealing with something immediately, is long-term health care even available to them, or what's going to happen at that point?
If they're in a crisis and they need help right away, they obviously got to find help. And sometimes they're going to have to pay for it out of their pocket. And sometimes if they don't do any type of planning, that's going to take all of their resources. Now, if it comes to a crisis, the biggest mistake that I see people making is relying on the advice of the county workers or the facility workers. Now, it's not that these people are bad. It's not that they want the worst for you, but typically they are not going to tell you ways that you can access medical care through the government program called Medicaid. They will most likely advise that you spend everything until you're out of your own money and then apply for Medicaid. And there's other ways to do that. So the biggest mistake that I think people make is not seeking out a professional like a elder planning attorney to advise them on what are the options, instead relying on the facility workers, the social workers, and maybe the county workers.
And Dan, how does the planning conversation change when the person needing care is single versus when they're in a healthy relationship with a spouse still living at home?
So that's a really great question, because the rules for qualifying for Medicaid are really the same for any individual, but when you include a spouse in that financial group, now the spouse has some rights and some abilities. There is what's called a spousal resource allowance. So instead of normally, if you were a single person, you'd have to spend down till you had no more than $2,000. That's also the rule for a person that's a couple. So the person who needs care has to be down to $2,000. The other person in Wisconsin can have, and this is in 2026, about $164,000. Now that's a maximum. So everything that they have together has to be spent down to about $166,000, and at that point, one of them can receive Medicaid. So if you're going with the government's plan and you don't have a professional helping you with the plan, then that's typically what happens. You spend and you spend and you spend until you reach that limit, and then the spouse is allowed to keep that $164,000, and the spouse, the healthy spouse, is also allowed to keep all of their income. Their income does not have to go to pay for the care of their needy spouse. However, the needy spouse's income is required to be used to pay for their care.
And does that number include the house or the equity in the house, Dan?
So the house is excluded as long as it's the residence. Now, you can only exclude one residence. You can't have like a vacation home or maybe another, say, hunting land. That none of that can be excluded. That also all has to be included as part of that. But the house and one car, even for a couple, you can only have one car excluded. You can also have an exclusion of burial accounts. They have to be certain designated burial accounts done in a certain way, but more commonly, and what I recommend is that people have prepaid funeral contracts with the funeral home, and that is also excludable. Now, everything that you have in your house, like your pots and pans and your furniture, that's also excluded. So there's a few things that are not counted when you go to apply for Medicaid. The issue is, and I want to make this clear, is that even if you keep your house and you're on Medicaid, as soon as both partners die, the state will come and take the house to repay the Medicaid that has been paid, and that's called estate recovery. Wisconsin has enhanced estate recovery, which means they'll come after the house, they'll come after life insurance policy proceeds, they will come after IRAs, they'll come after anything that belonged to the couple that was part of their marital assets to repay the Medicaid. So there are a lot of things that you can do to help save the assets from this. But if you just go without a plan, if you haven't talked to a professional and taken steps to minimize the ability of the government to make that recovery or to force you down to that $166,000, then that's what you're in for.
And Dan, when adult children get involved, what kinds of family tension or guilt do you often see show up around the care decisions and the money?
When the kids get involved, most of the time it's a blessing. You really love to see this. And let me tell you a little story. There was a mom and a pop, and they had kids who were not really close by, but close enough that they were watching mom and pop. And mom was really going downhill. She had memory problems, and pop was taking care of her. They were in their late 70s or early 80s. When they came to me, the children said, you really need to talk to somebody about this because mom needs care that dad can't give her. And what really precipitated this is dad's health had started going downhill because he was using all of his energy to try to take care of mom. He wasn't physically able, and he just didn't have the expertise and the strength really anymore to take care of her. And so his health started failing. He did not want mom to go into a facility, number one, because he loved to be around mom, but number two, because he didn't want to lose their little hobby farm. And he realized that having to pay for that long-term care was really going to do a number on their finances. So the kids brought him in. We determined that there was a way to get mom onto Medicaid soon, and we could do what we could to save the farm. In the end, there were several things that we did, and in this case, which is what people don't expect, is that dad, the one who did not need the care in the facility, died first after mom was in the facility, and then mom was in the facility. She lived for another 1.5 years or 2 years after dad, but we had done some things to make sure that the farm, instead of going directly to mom at dad's death, went into a special needs trust. And then the special needs trust, after mom's death, paid out to the children. The state did make an attempt to put a lien on the farm and take that, but we were able to show them that we had done all the proper things and the farm was saved. So the guilt in this story was dad's guilt for not being able to take care of mom, and we see this all the time. Now, usually it's flipped, is that the woman tries to take care of the man until she's just so frazzled and unable. She sacrifices her own health in those cases, and it's not necessary, and in fact, the guilt should not cause them to do that, because it doesn't help anybody when both people are spiraling like that. So sometimes we see kids that are grabby and they want to make sure that they get what they can get, but in the most cases, what we see is the spouse overworking and sacrificing their health to help their spouse, and then sometimes they often die first. The caregiver stresses themselves out to death. So be careful of that.
And we hear so many stories about those scenarios similar to what you've explained. And people sometimes assume that protecting assets means that you're gaming the system somehow. What does responsible, lawful planning actually look like?
That's a great question. And I do get some people, not very often, but some people say, hey, look, it's the plan that if you need care, then you're going to have to pay for your care. That's the way it's set up. The way I see it is that there is a system of discrimination in this country, and the discrimination that I'm talking about is not about race or sex or gender or religion or anything like that. It's based on what kind of problems that you have when you grow older. So let me give you an example of discrimination that's caused by the government, and it has to do with Medicaid and Medicare. Let's compare Betty and Margaret. Okay, Betty is getting older. She has a health problem. Betty's health problem is cancer, which is bad news. But Betty gets treatment. She gets surgery. She has radiation. She has chemotherapy, and everything goes into remission after they've spent $1 million, maybe $1.5 million on that treatment, and then the cancer comes back and she goes for more treatment and it's another $1 million, and now he spent $2.5 million. But the thing about Betty's care is it's all paid for through Medicare and then the Medicare supplement. So Betty doesn't have to worry about her house being lost. She doesn't have to spend all of her IRAs on her medical care. She doesn't have to spend down her savings, and she doesn't have to worry about her children losing their inheritance. So when she finally dies, her kids get an inheritance and everything goes as normal. Now, it's sad that she had cancer and it's sad that she had passed away, but let's compare that to Margaret. Now, Margaret, unfortunately, instead of getting cancer, got Alzheimer's disease. Now, Alzheimer's disease is not treated by surgery or in a hospital or chemotherapy. It is treated as just long-term care, which means we're going to keep her comfortable. We're going to help her get through every day, make her meals, make sure she's safe, keep her warm, etc. Because that's the treatment for Alzheimer's disease. Now, hopefully, they're working on treatments and it will get better, but this type of treatment, the long-term care treatment for Margaret, is going to have to be paid out of Margaret's pocket. So she pays and pays and pays until she can't pay anymore, and then she goes on a program called Medicaid. Now, Medicaid is something that you have to have very low assets for, while Medicare is something that even billionaires can sign up for when they're 65. That's the discrimination. It depends on what your ailment is. So if your ailment is cancer, now it's funny to say, but the cancer patient is the lucky one in this situation, because for purely financial reasons, if I were going to choose between one of these ailments, I would choose cancer. Not because I think it's a good thing, but because of the financial purposes. Now, there may be other considerations that would make me go the other way, but for purely financial reasons, cancer is the better disease to get because Medicare pays for that treatment. Medicare does not pay for long-term care treatment. The government discriminates a person that gets Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or just the ailments of growing old. If they need long-term care, they have to go broke. So this reflects on the morality of doing this planning. I want to help people not be discriminated against. I want to help them lessen the amount of discrimination that happens if they happen to have long-term care needs instead of other type of hospitalization or outpatient treatment needs. So what does the planning look like? It looks like coming to an attorney that does elder law and elder law pre-planning as early as, let's say, the mid-60s when you're thinking about retirement or shortly after retirement, because early planning is the best planning. And some of this planning takes 5 years to cement. So if you've got 5 years that you are likely to be healthy and not need long-term care, that's the best time to do planning. However, it's never too late until you've just about run out of assets. We've done planning for people that have been in a nursing home for more than a couple of years, and we've still made an effort, and we've been able to save quite a bit of assets for their kids and for their security. So that's what the planning looks like. You just have to start. You have to realize that there is an option, and it's something that you should pre-plan for instead of waiting to see what's going to happen.
Dan, thank you so much for your insights today and for the guidance through these real life case scenarios. They help us to understand more of the technical aspect of what that planning looks like. That's it for today's episode, folks. Thank you for joining us for One Happy Lawyer, the estate planning podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Attorney Dan Krause and his work at Krause Estate Planning and Elder Law Center, you can visit estateplanningpeople.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review, and we'll see you for the next episode.
Thanks, Lisa. It's been great.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.